Jihan, right? Okay, Sunday, Nichiyobi, Monday, Setsuyobi, Tuesday, Kayobi, Wednesday, Suyobi, Thursday, Mokuyobi, Friday, Kinyobi, Saturday, Doyobi, and that's what it looks like, vertical. Okay, and December 25th, Juni Gatsu Niju Go Nichi. I would let this cut through a little bit. It looks better for the goal. Just quick note about dates. Some of them, the pronunciation on the date gets a little weird, but in terms of writing the kanji, 1 through 31, any date in the month, you put the number and this nichi on the end, even though it doesn't always get pronounced that way. So you might not know how to pronounce all of the dates possible in the year, but you can write them all and read them all in kanji, because you guys have all the numbers you need. So, isn't that cool?
What would we say in place of it?
Well, there are some odd pronunciations. The dates 1st through 10th, the ones that end in 4, like 14th and 24th, and the 20th, all have irregular pronunciations. So that, if you want to know it, there's a page in the book somewhere that teaches them all.
127.
127, thank you. Okay, how would you guys phrase this one? Japanese person's book would be Nihonjin no hon. Exactly right. So Nihonjin no hon. So as you can see, it gets pronounced hon both places, but entirely different meanings in the two spots, right? So Nihonjin no hon works. Okay. Under the book, what would that be? Hai, hon. What was the next thing? No. Shita. Hai. And on top of the money? Anybody? What do you use? Okane. Yeah, okane is money, and it's written with the same kanji as the kin in kinyobi. It's just honorifical okane. This is a sort of extra, because it's not really required for this chapter to know that reading, but it's good to know, right? Okane. And so if something is on top of the money, let's say that, the bills are sitting there and there's a pen or something on top of it. No ue. Exactly right. Okane no ue. Okay. Notice I purposely did not write on the money because that has a completely different meaning in English, which that idiom does not translate to Japanese. Okay, you cannot say okane no ue to mean that somebody's accurate. Okay? So the idiom does not translate literally. Make sense? Okay. I did want to talk a little bit about how to write a few of these kanji, because like you can see here, I'm showing that usually the vertical and the bottom line do touch. Okay, this is a little bit too much gap here. And usually the two diagonal lines either touch or they're very close to touching. So this would look better with the line being about like that. Okay. The yo in all the days of the week. There is going to be some personal variation in proportion. But what I want everybody to realize is that it's made up of sun, katakana yo twice, right? And then that short-tailed bird radical that I warned you was going to come back to haunt you, right? And when you're writing that one, despite what it looks like in the textbook, because the print font is different from the handwritten style, you want this to be that person radical. Remember the side person radical? That's the start of it. So that's most definitely a piece, okay? And then this diagonal line, when you handwrite it, is a little bit left of vertical, if that makes any sense. And then, depending on who you ask, some people do the first horizontal, and then the vertical, and then 1, 2, 3. Some people do the 3 horizontals, then the vertical, then the final horizontal. Okay? In either case, it doesn't have to touch the side. A little bit of a gap there is okay. The top and bottom ones are usually a tad bit longer than the middle and come closer to touching here and here. You can see whether I'm writing it quickly or slowly, they still come closer than the middle two do. If you want all 4 of them to touch, that's okay. You can be that meticulous with it. But in the normal course of just writing quickly, it usually happens that they're not all equal length, even though that's what it looks like in the print font. Okay, does that make sense? So if you want to be that connected with it, these look good. Notice also that some people have a much smaller sun radical, higher or middle, a little bit longer, a little bit lower. Again, there's some personal variation there, that's fine, okay? It does look a little bit odd for this line to be leaning that way when you handwrite it. That's more of a print font style to have it leaning that direction. And this one looks a little bit odd because you can't really tell that that piece is there. That's okay. But, and you want your proportionality of the 2 yos on top and the short-tailed bird piece underneath to sort of work together, where the 2 yos together are kind of a top piece, and then the bottom piece is a little bit larger proportionate to the others.
What's the first, I'm just having trouble remembering it, what's the first radical in that kanji for sign?
For the day of the week.
rather?
What comes first
The
is
top.
always the left.
No, oh, sorry, I meant the top one on the right. Is that second?
Okay,
The one that looks like 2 backwards E's.
yeah, yo.
Okay.
Left to right, top to bottom
I was
are both
forgetting.
rules of thumb, okay? So just like when you were writing, say hiragana, left to right, top to bottom, right?
Yeah.
It's always left to right, top to bottom for probably 95% of kanji. Okay, there are occasional exceptions, which I'll point out to you as we get to many of them. Okay, but in general, those are 2 of the basic rules about kanji stroke work. Okay, so if you're breaking this one down, it's going to be the sun component first, then the first yo, the second yo, and then the person radical, and then the remainder of the short-tailed bird.
Right.
Okay, makes sense? A couple other little points. Everybody seems to have it pretty well figured out, but I like to point it out. Nichi and Getsu. Notice that when you're handwriting Nichi, you don't usually get the 2 vertical lines sticking down any further than where the bottom horizontal is. Having them stick out a little bit like that is more of a print font thing, not so much a handwritten thing. It's more normal to just connect the 2 bottoms here. contrast that with Getsu, which usually has a little bit of a curve to it, first of all, and the hook on that side, and then you do put these two lines more in the middle with plenty of space below.
Is it common to see it without the hook?
It can happen without the hook, yeah.
Okay.
But you definitely want to get at least a little bit of curve there. And this is a bent line, it's all one piece.
Right.
Okay? These two lines often don't connect all the way across. They should be close, but they should not cut through. And in an attempt to not let them cut through, many people stop short of them actually touching, which is okay. Okay, you see how there's a little bit of a gap there? On this side, there's a little bit of a gap on the other side, but they don't cut through. That's important because,
A little bit to the right of
yeah, having it look like that, that's not Getsu. Okay? Hey.
So when you say it's like a type font sort of thing, is it almost like an English font being a serif? How they have the little,
It's like, how many people actually write their A like that instead of like that?
right,
You know, yes, there are a few people who actually handwrite that version of a lowercase a. It's rare, right? And it's considered a little bit of an idiosyncrasy, right? Same kind of thing. So there are certain things that are just normally a print font thing, not a handwritten thing. Partly because it's actually harder to write that one and have it come out looking decent and not confusing it with some other letter, right? It almost looks like somebody wrote a letter upside down or something when you do that. So, so let's see, was there anything else? Oh, Mizu is another one that sometimes people have a hard time writing neatly or have a hard time differentiating from the ka and kayobi. So I wanted to address that real quick too. So the ka and kayobi, normally you write the outside two diagonals first and then put a hito through the center. Okay, and that goes back to another rule of thumb, which is two symmetrical sides, although it's more common actually to do the center first before the two symmetrical sides. This is an exception. So, see, I told you there would be exceptions sometimes. Okay, so that's ka, and then sui, you do the center line first, which again, some people draw it without the hook on the bottom, but most people put a hook on the bottom. The left-hand side is actually a bent line. It's actually one piece. It's more like a katakana fu, okay? And then the right-hand side is usually a swipe and another swipe. So that kind of came out funny because I was trying too hard to demonstrate the writing style. But this is pretty much what it's supposed to look like. This one's a little bit out of proportion. This is too long for the size of the side strokes. Okay, so that's approximately the proportions and the style you're looking for. So, you know, and this one is a sort of modification of that center before two symmetrical sides rule, because they're not exactly symmetrical sides, but it still is following that rule. Center first, then left, then right. Okay. Moku and hon should look very similar, right? Draw moku, add one extra line, and you've got hon. Right? Everybody sees that, right? Kin, we talked about the do and do yobi. Just be conscious of the top horizontal being shorter than the bottom horizontal. That's actually important because that is a different kanji.
Is it common to, in just personal handwriting, that you might have problems seeing the difference between sui and moku?
Sui and moku?
If someone has a sloppy handwriting, then they might look similar.
They shouldn't.
It just shouldn't happen.
You know, this if somebody's being sloppy, these two pieces shouldn't even be lining up exactly.
Okay.
So it shouldn't be possible to mistake that for that. The stroke orders are so different. If you're doing it in correct stroke order, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, right?
Okay, yeah. that's-
And this one is 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? They're entirely different stroke orders, which should produce a different enough look that you can't mistake them for the other. Okay? Yeah. Yeah, something's wrong if those are indistinguishable. Okay? Sorry, it hadn't even occurred to me that those two could be confused. Ka and sui, I'm used to people confusing. But it never occurred to me that sui and moku could be confused with each other. That's a new one, thanks. It's always good to have somebody with a different eye point out a place where potential confusion could be, so that I can make sure people aren't actually confused by it. Okay, so do is important. Sometimes people's do looks close to like the same size top and bottom, that's okay. But if you get to the point of it looking like an airplane, with the top horizontal a lot longer than the bottom one, that is very clearly a different character with a very different meaning. Okay, so that's important. Okay, also, I'm only bringing this up because I've seen it so many times on so many different pieces of paper already. Go, when you write the kanji for go, this is supposed to cut through. Okay, it's not supposed to stop short of cutting through. Contrast that with man, where it's definitely not supposed to cut through. Okay. Any questions about any of our kanji? Okay, I want to take a little bit of time to review vocab again, and then we're going to get into some bunbo. Okay, so we've got mizu, which is water,
Or under.
down or under, and it's pronounced shita. Right. Right, suyobi. Naka. Mai, which means in front of or, hospital. Right, no, it's yesterday. Desk. Park, right. Chair, right. Near, yes, nearby. Why? To exist, or inanimate, yes, to exist or to have, inanimate, and it conjugates to arimasu, right. Right, Mushiro, back or behind. Dog. Right. Right. Last week, yes. Bread, right. Right, bus stop, right. To understand, and it conjugates to hai wakarimasu. And or with, yes. And please note, it's only and or with for nouns. You can only connect two or more nouns with toes in between them. You cannot put toes in between two verbs or two adjectives to put them in the same sentence together. There's other ways to do that, but to is not it. Hai, nihon. Made. Right. Okay, and everybody remembers which day is which, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what's this one?
Kinyobi.
Friday, okay, right? Alone, yeah.
Mokyobi. Thursday.
Thursday, right?
Nichiobi.
Sunday, right?
Ure.
Ure, which is on top or above, yeah. Right?
Sunday.
Right,
Satsu. Today.
right. And it conjugates to
Machimasu.
machimasu, right? Right, side, sorry, right? Time or when, as in, kodomo no toki would be when someone was a child. Okay, kodomo no toki, right?
Meru.
Female, right? Right, yes. Class, right?
January.
January,
Takasan.
right? A lot, yes. Many.
Kaku. Today.
Right, and conjugates to,
Kakimasu.
right?
Omiyage.
Souvenir, right?
Kaimonmo. Shopping.
Shopping, right?
Kodomo. Child.
Right? Restaurant. Pau is to meet, and it changes to aimas, right? Temple, right? To buy, and it conjugates to kaimas. Same root as kaimono, right? Rai is approximate, about, right?
Next to.
Tonari is next to, yes, tonari. Toride is alone, yeah. Middle, yeah, or inside, depending on the Wednesday. Bookstore, yes. Right?
Tuesday.
Right?
Sanjihan. 3:30.
Right?
Dodonobi. Saturday.
Right? Saturday.
Japanese person.
Right, Nihonjin is this person, this one.
Either
To exist, or animate, so Nihonjin ga imasu, for example. Town, yes.
1 hour.
Ichijikan, right? Or,
Neko. Cat.
right?
Department store.
Right? Right?
Gohan. Meal. Rice.
Right? Cooked rice or meal. From, yes. Left.
Anata.
Right? Photo, picture, right? Hours, yes. So for example, Sanjikan would be 3 hours, right? Letter, right? Right? To take a picture, 写真を撮る. And it conjugates to 撮ります. はい、写真を撮ります. はい。Therefore.
Is it to write?
Between, 間 is between. So for example, ブランドンさんは安住さんとジャレットさんの間です. He's between Bethany and her. Make sense? that's Ida, that's how that one works. Shita means under or below, right?
Yobi.
Friday, right?
Kayobi Tuesday.
And
Hito person.
person, right? いいですね。質問がありますか? Any questions? Okay. じゃあ let's look at 117ページ。117ページを見てください。So we're gonna start with our little map thing, okay? Let's see, Hori-san, example 読んでください。
図書館は大学の後ろです。
はい。Okay, so 図書館は大学の後ろです。Does everybody see that in the little map? Okay, Chiara-san, you want to read the next example?
The part B, or oh, the part of the.
Yeah, the second example. See, there's two
Okay,
sentences.
this part here. Okay. 図書館はスーパーの隣です。
はい。図書館はスーパーの隣です。So you see how there's, because of where the 図書館 is placed, there's more than one possible sentence you could make to describe its location, right? So some of these are going to have more than one correct answer, okay? Does everybody see how the structure of it works? Okay, let's break it down then. So,
Appreciate it.
okay, so making space here. Okay, so, down to the dead marker. 図書館は Okay, which one do we want to use? 大学の後ろ? Let's just do that, okay? 大学の後ろ. Okay. Notice that I didn't put any of the kanji so that all you have to do is read hiragana. Okay, so 図書館は大学の後ろです。Okay, let's try this. Do you remember how to ask where is the library? 図書館は What's the question? どこですか? Okay. If you had to color code this, which part would correspond to the red in the answer? 図書館は, right? What part would correspond to 大学の後ろ? どこ, exactly. And then the des corresponds to deska. Yeah, right? So in the question, you've got the subject, right? Thing that you're asking about. You've got the question word, doko, and then deska, right? So where is 図書館, right? And then in the answer, because of parallel structure, you keep the 図書館は, you keep the des, right? You drop the ka because it's not a question anymore, right? Everybody understands that part? And then this part, 大学の後ろ is answering the question of doko. Does that make sense? So then we just have to understand what 大学の後ろ is saying. So 大学 means college. No is a little bit like possessive, right? It's not exactly apostrophe S all the time, but it's sort of like that. So colleges, and then 後ろ, behind, back, rear in this case fits a little bit better grammar-wise. In English, college is rear, right? It's behind the college.
If you think of the no as like an is in this case, it's like the college is behind, like colleges, like.
It belongs to them.
Yeah, well, that's more, this is more of a possessive, not a.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, another way to, you know, the college is back, the college is rear, the college is behind. It sounds ridiculous to say it in that format in English, but that's the grammar structure in Japanese, okay? That's the order.
And it almost sounds like personification.
Yeah, in English it comes across that way, in Japanese it doesn't have that implication. Okay? Daigaku no ushiro desu. But does everyone see how the structure works? So the item that you're telling about, you know, somebody wants to know where the library is, you're explaining Toshokan wa Daigaku no ushiro desu. Okay? So where the blue line is here, that's where you're going to put place, name, no, and then location description word to describe its location in relation to this other thing. Okay, does that make sense? So you're, basically what you're gonna have here is, this is gonna be a noun, no, and then a location word. Right? Above, below, behind, in front of, next to, near. Okay, the only one that's a little bit different is when we get to between. Yeah,
And this exercise you won't be using like arimas or anything, like,
you don't need to,
okay.
yeah.
So I don't
for
think
now-
there is
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, for now, we're just gonna stick to des for these kinds of sentences.
Lord,
Makes it easier.
thank you.
Yeah, okay, so noun, no, and then location word. The one exception is gonna be if our location word is between, aida, well, between by its very nature requires two other reference points, right?
Right.
Otherwise, it's not between anything. Make sense? So in that case, you're gonna get noun A, to, noun B, no, and then ida. Okay? And that whole phrase is going to take the same place as the blue segment.
What if, like, if it's more than two buildings, like say there's a crowd of people and someone's in the middle of a crowd? Like if you have more than
You
two
could-
things surrounding it.
Okay, so
Could you
let's
use it inside
say,
of that?
instead of Brandon being between two people, which you're clearly in a line, let's say he's just in a crowd. You could, you guys haven't learned the word for crowd yet, but on a crowd, no naka des. He's in the middle of that crowd, he's inside the crowd. Okay, that's what you would use there. So you would use no naka for that. So like, let's say, for example, another example that's similar to that would be, let's say you're describing where your pencil is and it's inside your kaban.
Right.
You know, there's lots of other stuff in there, but the pencil is in there too, among a zillion other things maybe, right? So you could say, enpitsu wa kaban no naka desu.
Okay.
Okay, it's inside the bag, so.
I wasn't sure if it would use naka if it's.
Yeah, even if it's not something enclosed by walls, if it's like in the middle of a crowd, in the middle of the train station, in the middle of the park, if somebody's inside an area that you can designate with a word, you could say that location no naka desu. So koe no naka would be he's in the park, you know.
So if you, what about like say, if you are talking to someone and you say, I'm in the park near the tree?
Okay, so you could say, koen no naka desu. Ki no chikaku desu. Ki is tree.
Right.
So it's the same kanji as moku, but it takes a different reading when it's a tree.
Okay, and I'm sure we'll get to that later.
Yeah, and notice that I separated it into two sentences for now, because linking two or more sentence clauses or two or more phrases is something that requires a verb conjugation that we're not gonna learn till lesson 6.
Okay.
Okay, so for the time being, short choppy sentences are gonna be the norm. And we just kinda have to accept that, okay, we might sound like 5-year-olds when we speak Japanese at this level, but that's okay, because you're learning, right? You don't have to sound like sophisticated 23-year-olds at this point in Japanese. Say that for English.
I can't even do that in English.
Okay, well, you don't have to. Okay, no judgment here. Okay, so now that we've got sort of a diagram of how the grammar works, is Jamie ready to do
I am.
ichiban?
Yes.
Dozo.
Okay, I wrote it down. 郵便局は病院の前です。
はい、そうですね。Notice that across the street from is mae in Japanese. Okay? Directly in front of is also mae, but even if there's a little bit of a distance between them, if it's clearly that's the nearest point of reference, then that place no mae still works. Okay? じゃあ2番、ケンさん。
喫茶店は公園柳です。No, excuse me, 公園の
Do you mean tonari?
I'm sorry, 喫茶店, it's below, or
Well,
or next
tonari
to,
would be
or,
next
I'm sorry,
to,
yeah, I
but
was thinking,
actually,
I'm not
if you
looking
look
at
at
a
the
perspective
picture,
of the map. It's
well, if you
below.
look at the picture, it's not really below or next to the park so much as it is inside the hotel.
Okay.
Can you see that that's what they're trying to show you?
Mhm.
It's not the greatest
Oh,
picture.
oh, okay,
But yeah,
okay.
what they're meaning for you to say is that the coffee shop is inside the hotel.
So, 喫茶店はホテルの inside is 中。喫茶店はホテルの中です。
はい、そうですね。That's what they were trying to get at there.
Sorry,
That's okay.
not-
Sometimes these pictures are hard to decipher. じゃあ、ポールさん。Where's the bus stop?
バス停は大学の前です。
はい。Which is true for our campus as well. はい。
公園はホテルの後ろです。
はい。Okay. さん。
スーパーは図書館の右です。
Okay, yes, to the right of the Tosokan. That works very well, both for the picture and for the perspective of the little stick people on the road. So, that works great. It gets a little more confusing when the perspective of the stick people differs from the perspective of you as the reader looking at the picture. So when it comes to those, I tend to avoid migi hirari and go for something more neutral like tonari, because it's hard for me to tell what you're thinking if it's one where the perspective of the picture and the perspective of the person looking at the picture might differ. So, Brando-san, 6番。
病院はホテルと大学の間です。
はい、ホテルと大学の間です。That works, right? Any questions about those? Don't worry, we're gonna get more practice with these. Now we're gonna look at part B, where we're gonna identify the locations of a few of the things in this bedroom. Okay, Taruko-san, どうぞ。
When we do the example, or?
Sure,
Or the first one?
either one. remembers desk.
Tsukue.
Tsukue,
Square,
tsukue,
square,
tsukue.
square, square. Okay. So,鉛筆は square の、鉛筆はsquare の上です。
はい、鉛筆は机の上です。Right? Other options would have been things like 鉛筆は手紙の隣です for example, next to the letter. Right? Yeah, that would have worked too. Okay, but there, like I said, there are multiple options for some of these. じゃあ、ジュリアンさん。
ラケットは、ラケットは机の下です。
はい、that works. 机の下です。Or the other option would have been カバンの中です。Right? じゃあ3番、森さん。
それはテレビの前です。
はい、テレビの前です。That works. And if somebody feels like that picture is ambiguous for them and you wanted to say テレビの近くです、that works too, near the TV. You know, that gets the point across. はい、杉浦さん。電話。
For that, is it literally denwa?
Yes.
It bothers me so much.
I know, it sounds silly, but that's
At least
what we're
it's
stuck
not
with.
テレビの隣です。
Okay, テレビの隣です. So there again, you've got a few different options. If you feel like that's next to the TV, fine. If you feel like it's near the TV or in front of the TV, that's okay. If you feel like that is on top of the table, that could work. テレビ、テーブルの上です。
For racket,
ラケット、はい。
is it in standard vernacular to just use racket or is it tennis no racket?
Just ラケット is fine. ラケットはカバンの中です。or 机の上です。机の下です。What's that?
That's enough to get the point across.
Yeah, I mean, there are a limited number of sports that use rackets, so raquetto always refers to a racket of some sort for a sport. I don't know of any other noun in Japanese that's called a racket other than the rackets that you would use for things like tennis, badminton, racquetball, that kind of stuff.
And they don't use, like
If you really wanted to
version of the word?
Well, if you really wanted to be
Raquetto.
specific, tennis no raquetto is possible. But they were just giving you the word racket here, because that's not one of our normal vocab for this chapter, so that's fine. You don't have to modify it if you don't want to. Okay, so, denwa wa terebi no tonari desu is what we decided on, right? That works. Jamie-san, come on.
カバンは机の中です。 Or, I'm sorry, that's wrong, that's near, under is,
No, under is the one you're looking for, yeah.
yeah, shita.
下です。はい。Yeah, 机の中です is inside the desk,
Yeah.
which implies like in one of the drawers or something, which this one doesn't seem to have.
It's inside the space it takes up.
Right, but you would still use 下 for that. はい。じゃあ、皆さん。
帽子は机の上、
Yeah, yeah,
上
ue.
です。
Yeah, that works. Note that ue is a little bit ambiguous. It can mean on the desk or above the desk. In this case, it's clearly above, because it's kind of hanging on the wall there. If you were worried about that, you could also say doa no tonari desu, or doa to mado no aida desu, between the door and the window. You know, there are other options you could put together for where that boshi is located. And by the way, exercises like this are going to be on the OPI. So, and there may be a written component where you ask where something is, your partner tells you, and then you have to identify it or fill in a blank spot where it's supposed to be so that you can show that you actually understood their description well enough to put it down on paper.
When is that OPI?
It's gonna be with our final, actually. It's gonna be the week before finals. It's gonna be that last class meeting, Thursday before finals week.
Is it going to be like one giant OPI with everything that we've learned, or is it only on
It's
this
gonna
material?
be mostly focused on lesson 4 material, but that doesn't mean you don't need to know stuff from previous chapters, because it all kind of incorporates itself, right?
You can't not have cumulative.
Right,
language.
yeah, it's just not possible. I mean, vocabulary from chapters 1, 2, and 3 are gonna be in there, whether you want it or not,
Mhm.
right? And the same with the grammar structures. And, yes, it's an OPI, but, I mean, it's perfectly good and probably a smart idea for you to start with, like, konnichiwa, and, greet your partner in Japanese and stuff like that to show that you remember some of your greetings and things like that. So, yeah, incorporating old stuff with new stuff is kind of part of the point, right? So let's look at the next one, which is pair work. So this is one of those information gap things where you have some of the information because you're looking at map A, but you're missing some. And if you're looking at map B, you've got other information, but you're missing some other things that the A is not missing, right? So we're gonna kind of alternate back and forth depending on which number we're up to. So we're gonna start with map A, numbers 1 through 5. And so the person answering is gonna have to look at map B to find their answer. Make sense? Let's who just answered, Ken? Yeah. Yeah, you just did
Sure.
the Boshi, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
let's have you ask example A and Paul answer A. So you're doing koen.
Okay. Koen wa doko desu ka?
Okay, can you see the example sentence there?
Yes.
It's written out there for you.
Yeah, I just don't remember one of the characters.
Koen wa
Yeah.
hoteru, is that the problem?
Yeah, I was stuck on the hotel. Koen wa hoteru no tonari desu.
Hi, so it's net. So now you're gonna ask about daigaku, and Audrey's going to tell you where it is.
Daigaku wa doko desu ka?
大学はホテルの後ろです。
Hi, so it's net. So if this were your OPI, you would have a little sheet of paper with the map A, and you would go ahead and write down daigaku in the hoteru spot to show me that you understood what she said about its location. Okay, and now it's Audrey's turn to ask about bus day.
バス停はどこですか？
バス停はデパートの前です。
はい。Okay, Kasumi-san.
We're just using
Some
map
map.
A.
We're going back and forth between A and B, and when we finish the questions on map A, then we're gonna do the 5 questions on map B as well.
If you're asking the question where it's at, currently you're looking at page 118.
You're
So we're
answering.
done.
Oh,
And then if you answer
That's
your-
why I was confused, because I was on 126. I'm like, that's
Okay,
not
yeah.
right.
Yeah, well, yeah, so Kopel, she's asking you where the high school is, the answer is gonna be on page 126. Does that make sense? So for now, you need to look at 126, and then the next one you'll be looking at the other one, okay? Dozo.
高校はどこですか？
ここは
see it?
Yeah, I see it.
It's inside.
Yeah. Well, it's Honya.
Honya,
Honya, it is, it's so tiny, I can't see the print.
yeah. So Honya wa,
Honya wa, departo no naka desu.
はい、そうですね。Honya wa departo no naka desu. Okay, and now you get to ask about Yubin Kyoku. Who's your answer?
郵便局はどこですか？
郵便局はデパートの隣です。
はい、そうですね。Okay, Julian-san, you get to ask about Yoin. And Corey's gonna have to look at map A to find an answer.
病院はどこですか？
病院はデパートの後ろです。
はい、そうですね。じゃあ、Corey-san, you get to ask about 喫茶店。
喫茶店はどこですか？
And map A has your answer.
喫茶店はホテルの What is inside? Is it Naka?
Yes.
Okay, Nakaです。
はい、そうですね。Okay, now you're gonna ask about スーパ
スーパーはどこですか？
スーパーは、公園の近くです。
ー。はい、that works. 公園の近く or 公園の隣。Both work in this case. Near it or next to it. じゃあ、you're gonna ask about 銀行。
銀行はどこですか？
銀行は、銀行は図書館の隣です。
はい、そうですね。Okay, and now you're gonna ask about
レストランはどこですか？
レストランはホテルの前です。
はい、ホテルの前です。はい、いいですね。Any questions about those? Okay, does that make sense? Does everybody feel like they understood how to do those? Okay. Yeah, so that's good. And just as a little cultural side note, it's very common for both Honya and Tsuba to be inside Depato in Japan. Depato are usually multi-story, high-rise buildings with every department a different floor. So like women's clothing might be one whole floor, men's clothing another whole floor, children's clothing another whole floor.
It's kind of the
Toy,
old
the
American
toy
style.
stuff might be another store, but very often the basement of a department store is a supermarket. And very often, there'll be another floor that's a bookstore. And also sometimes the top level will be like a food court with multiple small restaurants.
It's kind of like a mall, a big mall.
It's a little bit like a mall, but vertical.
Well, it's similar to the way American department stores used to do it, isn't it?
I guess so. I don't remember ever seeing an American department store set up that way, but in Japan, that's the only way they're set up because it just doesn't make sense to build out. You
Yeah,
need
they
to
can
build up.
In New York,
By old, you
somewhere,
mean like
but
really old, like the flagship department stores competing for space in New York. But
Yeah, that's what I'm
outside
talking
of
about.
that, outside of that.
Yeah, so yeah, it may very well be similar to like the old department stores in New York City or whatever. But yeah, that's the basic design of most department in Japan. And they do tend to be all one company. owning and operating the whole building. You know, although sometimes the restaurants and maybe the supermarket and maybe even the bookstore might be by different companies, but the
Would it be like the kind of Barnes
clothing
and
house,
Noble
what's
Starbucks
that?
thing?
The restaurants are, a lot of times the restaurants at these places are mostly Japanese style
What I
restaurants,
mean is
but.
like how, if you go to the most Barnes and Noble Starbucks.
Right, but usually it's not in the bookstore in Japan. I don't, that may have changed, but when I was there last, I don't remember bookstores having cafes in them. But in a department store, you know, there might be a bookstore level, like, you know, level 5 might be all bookstore stuff. Then if you go up to level 10, that might be the top floor, and that's where the food is.
Right.
That's pretty typical up there. Okay, じゃあ先生は大学生でした。Let's look at past tense for a little bit. Okay, so, we ready? So first of all, they're giving you some information about him in the past, that 25 years ago he was 22 years old, a senior at college, a good student, and majoring in Japanese history, right? So the idea is that we're asking and answering questions about him in the past. Not what is he doing now, but what was he like back then, okay? So we're gonna let, let's see, Ken and Paul do the first Q&A there in the example. 118 page, back to 118 page, where map A was. There you go.
Wait, after.
Hi. So, the Q.
Okay. Yamashita sensei wa daigakusei deshita ka?
Hi.
はい、山下先生は大学生でした。
Hi. So that's pretty easy, right? Pretty straightforward. Past tense question, past tense positive answer. Now, I want Paul and Audrey to ask and answer the next example.
山下先生は9歳でしたか？
いいえ、山下先生は19歳じゃなかったです。
Okay, so the main point that we're practicing here is how to do the past tense forms of des. Does everybody remember them? They just demonstrated them real quick. Let's review them real quick also, okay? So remember we talked about that you could do a little grid. So, positive and negative that way, and present and past that way, right? So present positive is des, exactly, right? Present negative was,
でした。
no, present negative, janai des, remember that? It's been a while since we used it, but does everybody remember it? Janai des. Okay. Past positive was deshita. Okay. And now the past negative is what? Not janai deshita, no. Jana. Jana. Katta des. Okay. So this is the important one to pay attention to because what you guessed was what everybody guesses, right? But it doesn't work. Okay? So, janai, this is an important conjugation to pay attention to because this is going to come back next semester in a big way. Lesson 5 uses this for conjugating a whole bunch of other stuff called adjectives. Okay? So this is gonna be really, really important. So, janai, the I on the end of the nai is what gets dropped and replaced with katta. Okay, everything else stays the same. Do you see what happened? So janai des changes to janakatta des. So the key point here is that anytime you have a nai ending in a verb conjugation or an adjective conjugation, the way it changes to past tense is to change to nakatta. That's the key point to know here. Nai changes to nakatta. The des does not change. And that is so counterintuitive that lots and lots and lots of people want to say janai deshita, but it's grammatically incorrect. Okay? It's a little bit like in English, somebody saying, I don't know, what's an equivalent? No. I can't think of a good equivalent analogy for English, but it's just bad grammar to use janai deshita. It doesn't
Is
exist
it
in
like
Japanese.
I not was there?
Huh?
So like I not was there?
It's a grammar structure that literally does not exist in the language. It's just creating a word that doesn't
So
exist.
someone would just look at you like you're crazy if you say that?
It just sounds crazy. Yeah, it just sounds, it's like you made up your own negative. You know, somebody says, oh, was that your dog? And instead of saying, no, it wasn't, you make something up that doesn't make any sense.
Not dog. Mine.
Yeah.
Was.
Yeah, it's like a made-up word. Like somebody asks you was that your dog, and you answer with McGruff. I was like, huh? That wasn't even a word. What are you talking about? Okay, so janai desu, janakatta desu. That is a really important thing to know. And Japanese has two classes of adjective. One class conjugates the exact same way as nouns plus des. So basically, by knowing this, you've already learned how to conjugate half the adjectives in Japanese. Okay? You just haven't learned the adjectives yet. Okay? How the other half of the adjectives conjugate follows a different set of rules, and like I said, we learned those in lesson 5, which will be the first chapter in second semester Japanese. Okay? So I wanted to really highlight that because any of these questions that you're going to answer no to, janakatta desu is how you're going to be ending that no, he wasn't answer. Make sense?
It's kata, no?
Janakatta.
Oh, let's say kata.
Katta. Yeah, it's got a small tsu in it. So, janakatta. はい、じゃあどうぞ。
山下先生は子供でしたか？いいえ、子供じゃなかったです。
はい、いいですね。Yeah, 22 doesn't qualify as child anymore. So, どうぞ、2番。
山下先生は1年生でしたか？
いえ、1年生じゃなかったです。
はい。じゃなかったです。
です。
はい。じゃなかったです。はい。じゃあ3番。
山下先生はいい学生でしたか？
Wait, which one again?
3番。いい学生. Does everybody know what that means? A good student, yes. Did we have E?
Yes.
student?
Yes.
Okay.
E,
So, good student. いい学生でしたか? So, English key says that he was a good student, so
so,
what's the yes pattern that they're giving you in the example? You start with height. 学生
でした。
でした。Exactly. Okay? いい学生でした。じゃあ、4番聞いてください。
町田先生の専攻は英語でしたか？
はい、英語でしたか？
いいえ、専攻は英語じゃなかったです。
じゃなかったです。
じゃなかったです。
はい、じゃなかったです。はい、じゃあ次どうぞ。
山下先生の専攻は歴史でしたか？
はい、山下先生の専攻は日本語の歴史でした。
Actually, 日本
日本
の歴史でした。はい。That works. Yeah. 日本語の歴史 would be a little different. The history of the
Yeah.
Japanese language instead of
Japanese
the
language.
history of Japan.
History, Japanese.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be like linguistics history, which is a lot different from just straight history, right?
That's the career to go into.
Yeah.
I repeated that ending like 5 times in my head, so I would say it right, so I'm gonna do it.
Oh, of
So,
course.
so you said, Nihongo,
日本の
no.
歴史でした。Yeah, would be Japanese history.
Okay.
Because Nihongo no rekishi is Japanese language history, which is an entirely different field, right?
So just, okay.
Nihon no rekishi would be the history of Japan. Nihongo no rekishi would be history of the Japanese language. Right, so when we say Japanese history, we generally mean history of Japan, right? We're not necessarily talking about history of the Japanese language specifically.
So if he would have gone with just Nihon and no Rekishi. Okay.
Right. Okay, and also I just wanted to point out, did everybody notice that although there was an adjective in sentence number 3, question, because it's modifying a noun, the noun is what gets the des conjugation, okay? So that's why you can do that, because we haven't learned how to conjugate adjectives yet, but that adjective didn't need to conjugate because it was placed before the noun. And anytime you have a sentence in Japanese where something is going to have to conjugate, it's going to be at the end of the phrase or sentence. If it's a sentence with more than one clause, it might be the end of the phrase, and then it conjugates to something that allows it to connect to the next phrase. But if it's at the end of a sentence, it's going to conjugate for tense and positive or negative at the end of the sentence. Okay. Any questions about how deshita works? Okay. Any questions about how the location words and descriptions of where things go works? So, tsukuri no ue desu, tsukuri no shita desu, tosokan no mae desu, tosokan no ushiro desu, tomodachi no tonari desu. You know, all those you understand? Okay. On Thursday, we will move on. I usually skip the guessing game ones just because I don't feel like they're all that useful. Right?
We skipping our homework?
Yeah. Okay. So usually what I go to next is going to be section 4. So getsuyobi ni nani o shimashita ka? So using verbs also in the past tense. Okay? And then I think the makume no renshu will have more practice of deshita as well. Okay? So you've got some idea of what to practice for the apply.
Oh, is that yours?
This one might be yours.